everyone, and welcome to another Sony Creative Software live webinar. I'm Gary Rebholz. Today we're going to take a look at the mixing console window in both Acid Pro, Vegas Pro, and Acid Music Studio. The mixing console gives you all kinds of tools for working with your audio in a very sophisticated manner. Whether you're working on a multi-track audio project in Acid Pro or Acid Music Studio, or you're working on your audio mix in a video project in Vegas Pro, the mixing console window can give you a lot of flexibility that you might not know about if you haven't used it before. So we're going to take a good look at it throughout the next 45 minutes or so. We will leave 15 minutes at the end for questions, just like we always do. And we'll also have this presentation available for on-demand viewing within 2 weeks of the end of the show today. Just a reminder that you can watch this presentation in full screen mode. Just point to the presentation in the small window and a button will show up that says full. Just click that full button and you'll be able to watch it in full screen mode. And I really encourage you to do that today, especially because of the nature of the mixing console window and the size of the controls and so forth. It's going to be hard for me to zoom in and out like I frequently do in other webinars. So you might need to make sure you're in full screen mode to be able to see everything that I'm doing. So let's switch over to the computer here and take a look at the mixing console in Vegas Pro, Acid Pro, and Acid Music Studio. So real quickly, some of the things that we're going to be exploring in this webinar, we're going to take a look at basically all of the components of the mixing console window. We're going to go through the tools one by one and show you what they all are, and hopefully give you an explanation of not only what they do, but what you can do with them. You're going to learn about your view options, audio busing. Audio busing is a big one, and I hope that you get a lot out of that section because it's a very powerful feature in Vegas Pro, Acid Pro, and Acid Music Studio that a lot of people don't use, and they really should be using. So you can learn how that works through the course of this presentation. Effects busing and mixing tools and techniques. So those are the things we're going to take a look at here. Now in this presentation, I'm going to be working mostly in Acid Pro. The mixing console window in Acid Pro is essentially identical to that in Vegas Pro. There are a few small differences, but in large part they're identical and they work the same. And the same with Acid Music Studio. So whether you're using Acid, one of the Acid softwares, or you're using Vegas for video editing, the mixing console that I'm showing you here in Acid Pro is going to be very similar to the one that you're going to be using in whatever app you're using. I will jump over into Vegas Pro briefly at some point, just to kind of show you that, yeah, all this stuff does apply in Vegas Pro as well. Now in Acid Pro, we're looking at this in the context of a multi-track project, a multi-track music project. So if I scroll up and down here, you can see that I've got 20-some tracks. I've got 18 tracks, some of which are stereo tracks. So really there are about 22, 23 channels of audio in this project. So quite a bit of audio going on here. And if you look at the names in the scribble strip on the left side in the track list, you can see that I've got some drum stuff here. I've got some guitars. It's just your typical multi-track mix. Let me go ahead and play just a little piece of it so you hear what we're working with here, and then we'll carry on with it. So you can hear it's just sort of a slow-moving rock and roll piece that we've recorded in multi-tracks here. So that's what we're going to be working with throughout most of the presentation. Now in Acid Pro, you have the mixing console window down here in the right corner. It shows up by default. In Vegas Pro, if I switch over to Vegas Pro real quickly, you'll see that the mixing console does not appear in the default window layout. So to find it in Vegas Pro, you're going to go to the View menu, choose View, View Mixing Console. I just have to find it here. There it is, View Mixing Console, and it comes up in a floating window. Of course, This window can be docked into the window docking area, or it can be docked into a floating dock, whatever you want to do with it. You can resize it, and so forth, right? So in Vegas Pro, you'll have to go to the View menu and choose the mixing console window from the View menu in order to see it. Let's switch back to Acid Pro here. So in Acid Pro, the mixing console window just opens up. Now, when you're working on your project just through the course of either recording your project or adding loops to your project or MIDI or whatever it is, you might leave the mixing console window docked down in the bottom here. What is really nice is to have a second monitor that you can pull the mixing console window away from its dock, and then if I had another monitor here, which I don't, but if I did, I could just pull it off and dock it onto my other screen. And so when I'm in mix down mode, when I'm working on my tracks and mixing, I'll pull that mixing console window off, put it on a different, my second screen, and then double click the title bar to make it as big as possible, and that's what I've done here. So on this single screen window, I've just, I'm going to have to jump back and forth between my mixing console and my tracks if I want to do something in there. But for now, we'll just leave this in full screen mode here. So what you've got here is, in the mixing console window, is basically if you've ever used or seen a hardware mixing panel or a mixer, it looks very similar to this. You've got a number of, each track is represented by a channel in the mixer, and that's what you're seeing here. So you got channel 1, channel 2, and so forth all the way down the line. These first tracks are audio tracks, audio channels. You get to number 10 and number 11, those are MIDI channels. From there you go to some more audio channels, and you've got a scroll bar down here so you can see everything in the window. And if we scroll far enough, you'll see that, yeah, all of the 18 tracks are there. Then we start getting into some busing with the synth buses that we've added in this project, an effects bus, an input bus, and several auxiliary buses, and finally the master bus. Now, if you don't know what busing means and all that stuff, that's exactly what we're going to talk about here, so don't worry about that right now. We'll get to that in a little bit, and I'll explain exactly why this project has not only the tracks, but also these things I keep calling buses. So let's go back to the left side of the mixing console here and look at it. Now, obviously, with a project that's this big, we can't see all of our channels at the same time, and that's why I had to scroll over there. Now, there are several things that we can do to see the things that we want to see. First of all, there are several view options that are available in the mixing console. So while this basically is emulating a hardware mixer, it's much more powerful than a hardware mixer because we can add and subtract things from this view to concentrate on just the things we want to see. So for instance, right now, excuse me, right now I've got all of these channels are sized to their maximum width, but I can point to the middle of any one of them and change the width of that particular channel. Or I can use, down at the bottom here, I can use this adjustment slider to adjust the width of all of them. Excuse me. So here I've got all my 18 tracks, and most of my buses are visible because I've made the track channels so thin. Okay, so that's the first thing you can do. Another thing you can do is you can hide the channel. You can hide certain channels or any specific channel. You can hide groups of channels. You can hide components within the channel so that you're really seeing just anything you want. Whitney, can you mute my microphone for a second? I got a frog. Okay, sorry about that, folks. So as I was saying, you can hide and show various pieces of the mixing console, each channel. So for instance, we're going to go through one channel of this mix and just kind of take a look at what we've got in place. So we don't need to see all these other channels. Well, there are a couple of different ways I can hide the channels. So one thing I can do is I can use these controls down here to hide and show specific channels. If I click the Show All button, then everything shows up in my mixing console, including now we've got a new preview channel. But if I turn that off, I have individual control over what I see. And the reason the preview channel disappears when I turn off Show All is that the individual button for the preview bus is off. If I click that, it turns it on and the preview channel becomes visible again. So let's say for now I want to hide my preview bus. In fact, I want to hide all of my buses. I don't need any of those bus channels, so I'm going to hide my audio buses. I'm going to hide my input bus. I'm going to hide my soft synth bus. I'm going to hide my assignable effects, and I'll even hide my master bus for now. So if you saw over at the right side of my mixer window here, as I'm hiding those elements, I gain more space. So now I can make the remaining tracks even wider to take up more space. So I just view what I want to see. Now I've got a couple of MIDI tracks in here. I don't need to see those either, so I'm going to turn those off as well. Okay, so now I've got nothing but audio tracks in my project, in my view here, in my mixing console view. And you can see that they're all audio tracks. If you look across the top, they're all identified as audio tracks. But I said we wanted to concentrate on one track in specific, just so that we can concentrate on the individual tools in the track. So I don't need all these other tracks visible, and the track I want to concentrate on is track number 8. So I want to hide all the rest of these. And that's what the view list is for over on the left here. I can one by one deselect these checkboxes and hide those channels. Or if I know I need to hide a bunch of them, I can click the first one I want to hide and hold the Shift key and click the last one I want to hide. It's a multi-selection, just a regular old Windows multi-selection technique, and then deselect one of them and they all go away. So I'll do the same thing with the other tracks here, the other audio tracks remaining in the project, and now I'm down to just my one audio channel. Okay, so you can see how flexible the view of this mixing console window is. And in this particular case, it's really very helpful because if I'm working on a single monitor computer like I am here, I might need to reclaim some of the space that this mixing console window is taking up. And in fact, I can hide now that I've done everything I want to do with the channel list. I can hide the channel list and gain even more space. And now I can move the edge of the mixing console window over, and I can see my project if I wanted, for some reason, need to work on an event or do something there. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that the controls, as we go through these, the controls that we have in the mixing console are basically the same controls you have over here on the left side of the window in the track list. So for instance, with track 8, which is the one that we're using here, let me scroll up to track 8. Here's track 8. It's got a volume slider, and it's got a panning slider, and it's got arm for record and the scribble strip, and all these other mute solo buttons and so forth. Well, if we come over to the channel, we've got the scribble strip on the bottom here. It's called guitar. I can rename it if I want to. I've got the volume slider. I've got all the buttons, mute, solo, and so forth, panning, and so forth. It's all right here in the mixing console's channel. Now, one thing that the mixing console has that the track list on the left does not have is the meter on the channel. So that's a peak meter. If I play this project, as soon as that guitar kicks in, you'll be able to see the meters start dancing, right? So there we go. So it's nice in the mixing console to have the meter view there, so you can always keep an eye on each individual track's peak. Now, if you make the track height of your track tall enough, like I am here, then the meter does show up. So you have it there as well. But if your track height is small, like it was a moment ago, like many of these others are, then the meter is one of the things that will go away. Okay. All right. Now let's go over to to the track channel. I'll move this over to the middle of the screen here so you can kind of see it better. And let's just start talking about the pieces of the channel. One thing that we already looked at, the hiding certain channel types, and right now we're only showing audio tracks, but you can also show and hide certain aspects of each channel. So for right now, this channel is showing basically everything, but if I don't need some of these things, I can just turn them off, and pretty soon you're left with nothing but the faders because I've turned everything else off. If I turn the meters button on, the meter control region on, the meter then moves up from next to the fader up to the top above the fader, much like a hardware mixer is probably configured that you've seen before. And again, when I play this, there the meters are playing. All right, I'm going to turn those meters back off so that the meters come back down next to the volume slider, and the volume slider is just, just up and down, louder and softer. All of the controls that we saw in the left track list on the left are here as well, as I mentioned. So for now, let's solo this track so it's the only one we're hearing. Notice that in the timeline, all the other tracks get grayed away, and the only one that's visibly active is the guitar track that we're working on. So now that I've soloed it, when I play this, you hear just the guitar. Okay? If I unsolo that and mute this track, just the opposite happens. Now you're not going to hear that guitar. Now you still hear a guitar because channel 9 is also a guitar, a copy of that same guitar. So for now, just real quickly, I'm going to show channel 9 and mute channel 9, and that takes our guitars completely out of the mix. Okay? I'll unmute channel 8, and I'll leave channel 9 muted for now so that we know we're always just listening to channel 8, and I'll go ahead and hide channel 9 again, so we're looking at just 8. Okay. As I said, there's a scribble strip down at the bottom here where you can change the names. So if I want to call this maybe first guitar to keep it separate from the guitar on channel 9, I can do that. Notice that when I change the name down here on the scribble strip, if we come over to the scribble strip on the track list at the left, it also changes there. So anything we do in the channel on the mixing console window is going to update in the track list as well. Okay, so you have your mute solo buttons. We looked at those. You have an edit insert effects chain button. So if I click that, you can see that this track has a track EQ on it already. By default, all tracks in Acid Pro have a track EQ. In Vegas Pro, there's a track EQ, a track compressor, and a track noise gate that are all there by default when you first start a project. So that's the same as getting to it with this button over here. Okay. There's also the switch phase button, the arm for record button, and the input monitoring button. Now if I couldn't use a multi-channel input-output device because my webcasting software doesn't support that. So I can't really show you this, but if I did have that, I could come in here and turn my input monitoring on or off, or turn it to auto mode. And input monitoring is used when you're recording onto a track to hear what you're recording as you record it. So all those controls are there. You've also got your panning control right at the top here, so I can pan it right, left, and so forth. Right now it's panned pretty far over to the left. And if we had looked at the panning on channel 9, we'd see that that's kind of bounced over to the right to sort of even things out a little bit. And you've also got your automation controls up here. So I can choose the automation mode that I want to work with. So let's work in automation right, turn automation on. Now before I turn it on, notice the icon on the volume fader. When I turn automation on, this control now turns, it's no longer a volume fader, it's an automation control. Same with the panning slider up here. And so the way this works is if I play my project and I now start to adjust this level of this track, You can see in the track itself it's drawing an automation envelope, and I'm automating this mix, turning it up and down automatically over time. Okay, I can do the same thing with my panning. I want to pan all the way left, all the way right, and it's now behind the window here, but you can see here that it's made those panning changes in automation. Okay, so the automation controls are accessible here in the mixing channel as well, in the mixing console as well. I'll turn automation off, and when I play the project again, I'm going to mute that guitar track so you're not trying to listen to so much while I'm talking. But now you'll see if I turn the automation back on, you'll see that the automation controls, they're emulating the moves that I made. The volume's going up and down over time, and in a moment when we hit the panning automation, the panning control will start moving over time. So that's automation. Okay, so I think this automation tool is actually a tool that's sort of overlooked in both Vegas Pro and Acid Pro because it enables you to do real-time automation to your mix, and especially when you're doing mix down of maybe sound effects in Vegas Pro, or like in this case a multi-track audio project. It's pretty neat to be able to listen and make adjustments to your volume as you're listening to it, and have those adjustments recorded by the automation controls. Okay. All right, so those are the basic tools of an audio channel. And in the bus channels, the controls are going to be much the same, but there are some different ones, and we'll get to those in a second. But there are a few more advanced controls in the audio channel that we haven't talked about, and those are those things that I hid down here a moment ago, or a little earlier. So let's just start going up the line and see what these things all do. Now the meters. You saw that a moment ago where I turned the meters on and the meters jump from being down next to the slider up to above the slider. So that's all the meters window, the meter region does. So let me turn that off. The next one up is the I/O control region. I/O stands for in and out. So this is the button, the buttons in this region, they appeared up here. These are the buttons that are going to let you dictate where the audio that's going to, if you're recording, where the audio is coming from that's going to land on this track, that's going to be recorded to this track. And that's the top button. So right now it's just pointing to sound mapper left. If I had a multiple input-output sound card that was more than just stereo like this one is, I would have a whole list of inputs that I could choose from here. But for right now, we're just looking at we've got it set to the left, input A left. Okay, so you can use the sound mapper, and you can use the audio input. Okay, if you have a more sophisticated sound input-output device, then you're probably using ASIO drivers for low latency with your recording and so forth. That stuff would all appear here. The bottom of the two buttons is the output. Where is the output of this track going? Well, by default, let's switch back over to Vegas because I've got that Vegas Pro set to its defaults. And by default, in the output of a track, oops, I just turned it off. The output of a track is by default sent to the master. What does that mean? The master means the master bus. So if I scroll over to the right here, here's the master bus. And this is where we get into talking about buses and what that means. And basically, a real sort of simplistic way of explaining what, excuse me, what an audio bus does is to relate it to another kind of bus, like a school bus. If you imagine the master bus being a school bus and all the channels, all the tracks in my project being school children, well, all those children are going to get on that bus, and that bus is then going to take them somewhere. It's going to take them to school, right? Well, it's the same concept with audio. If I route all of my audio tracks to my master bus, then that master bus is going to take that audio someplace, and typically that someplace is going to be the speakers that you're monitoring with. And when you render your project, it's going to take that audio to your final file format. So that's all busing means. It's just a way to get a group of audio objects from one place, the timeline, to another place, your speakers or your final project. Okay. Now back in my Acid Pro project, I've got my busing. I've got things set up differently than just everything going to the master bus. So let's talk a little bit about. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's hold off on that discussion. I'll come back to it. But that's what the input-output section is all about, and we'll talk about buses a little bit more in a few minutes. Before I get into that, let's talk about a couple of these other buttons and regions down here. So the next region up on my list is the Show Sends Control region. So if I turn that on, you now have another region up here. So what's this all about? Well, again, this has to do with sending audio from this track, from this channel, somewhere. And when we get into our discussion of busing, we'll come back to this tool and show you how you might use your Sends region to make your life a lot easier. And the final button that we can click to show the final region is the Show Insert Effects Control region. So if I turn that on, we now have another view of our our insert effects on this channel. Now, insert effects are also called track effects, and those were the ones we looked at by clicking this button down here. If I click that button, it brought up the track EQ, and I can add more or make adjustments, whatever I want to do. I can get to that same exact window by clicking the track EQ button up here. So it's just another way of getting to the plugins that you've got on that channel. Now, in this case, there's only one plugin on the channel, so maybe it's no big deal to go either way. But if I had, a chain of plugins on this channel, maybe 5 or 6 different effects on this channel, which is totally viable in a mix, then it would be kind of nice to be able to see all those listed here in the channel. So if I wanted another one, I can click another one. Let's say I wanted to put some reverb on this and just choose Sony Reverb. Now it appears in this list, and I can access it very quickly from that list as well as from the window over here. So it's just another way of viewing your insert effects. Okay, I'm going to leave all of those channels on for the rest of the discussion so that we can take a look at how I've got this particular project mixed and show you how I'm using these various tools. I will adjust the size of these a little bit to give some things more or less space and so forth. Each of these things is adjustable like that. Okay. So I keep talking about buses, and I kind of gave a short description of what you can think of a bus as doing, which is basically just taking your audio from one place, namely a track in your project, moving it along to another place, the speakers of your sound system or your final rendered file. But there's really much more you can do with busing than just going straight from the timeline to your final output. And that's what I want to talk about now. And that's what some of these tools across the top that you've probably seen, and maybe you've used them, but maybe you have wondered, well, what in the heck are they? What do they do? And so let's go through and we'll talk about input buses, we'll talk about auxiliary buses and soft synth buses, as well as assignable effects buses. Okay. There are a couple of buttons here that I should probably mention before I go any farther in the bus discussion, just so that we can you can get a handle on what these do. The first one is the down mix output button, and what this button does is it basically lets you hear what your project is going to sound like in mono. This is important for a multi-track audio mix where you're spending all kinds of time creating panning and placing instruments in certain points in the stereo field. It's important to hear, well, what's it going to sound like if somebody listens to this on an old radio that is a mono radio, or some old car radio or something? Is it going to sound good in mono? Well, to find that out, you could just click the down mix output button. Let me unmute the track, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to hear this from over the webinar. But I'm going to play this, and this is a stereo mix. And then I'll down mix it to mono and see if you hear any difference in your in the way it sounds. So it's just a good way. Here it is playing in stereo. And I'm going to bring the volume of that track up a little bit. And let me down mix to mono. So now it's a mono mix. In other words, the same thing is coming out of both speakers instead of things being spread across the right and left speakers to give a stereo effect. Okay, so if I want to go back to stereo, I can just turn that off. Now another button here is the dim output button. This is great for a situation just like this, where the music is playing and you're trying to talk to somebody. I can click that dim output button. The project continues to play. You can still probably hear it, but it's dropped by, I think it's maybe 12 dB or 6 dB or something like that. So it's maybe half as loud or less. Another reason that this is a great tool is sometimes a mix will sound fantastic to you when you're listening to it loud, but it might not sound so great when you're listening to it quiet. Some things will start dropping out of the mix, or something pops out more prominently in the mix when it's quiet. So it's a good way to just listen quietly for a moment and make sure your mix is holding together at that quieter level. And of course, to turn it off, just click it. Okay. You can add insert an audio track. You can insert a MIDI track. These buttons are pretty self-explanatory. Just want a new track, just click that button. Okay. Now let's talk about the buses a little bit more carefully. The first bus that we'll talk about is the assignable effects bus. And at first glance, you might be thinking, well, why do I need a whole bus just for effects? I've got the insert effects on each channel here, so why not just set the effect here on the channel? Well, sometimes that works great, just like I did here. I added a reverb to this specific channel. But other times, you might have one effect, like an echo or a reverb or something, that you want more than one channel to have. And rather than put that individual effect on each channel one by one, you could create an assignable effect bus and then route both of the channels to that bus. And in fact, that's exactly what I've done with my guitars here. So let me turn on the copy of Guitar Channel 9 and take a look at what I've done here. If I play this, I'll solo both of these tracks so you're hearing just the guitar on those two channels. Okay, so if you're listening closely, you can hear that there is some echo on that guitar. Well, both of those tracks have echo on them, and you can see that neither of them has echoes in the channels itself. So where's the echo coming from? It's coming from an assignable effect. So let me turn on my assignable effects bus, and here we have a bus, an assignable effects bus, which I've called on the scribble strip down here. I've called echo, and you can see in the insert effects area of the bus, which is very similar to the one on each track channel, I've got a simple delay. And if I click that button, you can see the parameters that I've set up for that simple delay. So I've got a channel there that has a simple delay, and now I want that delay to be on both of these guitars. Well, right now you can see a control called Drum Mix in my Send section. If I click that control, I get a drop-down list of all the other possible destinations that I can send this channel to. So instead of working with the Drum Mix button here, I'm going to go to my echo effects. Right here it is, the echo assignable effect. And if I choose that, you can now see that I'm sending minus 2.8 dB of both channels along to that echo assignable effect. So if I play this again, and then come over to my echo assignable effect, you can see the meters jumping. If I want more echo, I can raise it. If I want less, I can bring it down. If I want to mute the echo for a moment, I can mute the echo on both tracks using one mute button. This is where busing becomes really, really powerful, because since I've got multiple tracks going to this one effect bus, I can use the controls of that bus to affect everything coming from those tracks. So let me unmute it, and right now I've got that echo is happening on the right, but I could change the panning of the echo to send it to the left, and it's the echo of both tracks being sent to the left. So you can see that because I've bussed these two tracks to an assignable effect bus, I've got a lot of power over the echo on those two tracks, rather than having to come over and change the echo individually on track 8 and then trying to do exactly the same thing on track 9. I can just use the controls in the assignable effect bus and affect both of them that way. So this is really a powerful feature. Now, if we go back over to the sends section, we see that we have a post, a little thing that is called post here. That's a button, and it toggles between post and pre. So let's take a second to see what that's all about. I'm going to unsolo that the second guitar track, so we're only hearing the first one. Basically, what this pre-post button allows me to do is to say, do I want the signal from this channel to be routed over to my effects bus before or after it routes through my channel? Okay, what does that mean? Well, right now it's in post. So if I play this, post means that the audio from this track is not being sent to the effects bus until after it's gone through the channel track, or the volume gain stage of the channel. So if I lower the volume of the channel, I lose my echo, because it's running from the echo machine, or the audio is running through the channel, then to the echo and to the echo bus. So if I lower the volume, we lose the echo as well as the main audio. On the other hand, if I change that to pre, now we're sending audio to the effects bus before it goes through the volume. So if I lower the volume now, you still hear the echo, even though you don't hear the original guitar. So that's what pre and post is all about. And that's kind of a concept that trips people up sometimes. So it's a good one to know. And there are various reasons why you might want to go pre, and various other reasons why you might want to go post. I think I normally, when I'm going to an effects bus like this, I normally work in post, because I kind of want the echo to react to whatever changes I make to my track. But that might not always be the case in your projects. Okay. The next bus that I want to talk about, let's hide the let's hide the assignable effects bus. Can you mute me again, Whitney? Sorry about that. Okay, I've hidden the assignable effects bus, and I'm going to show my audio buses. And in this case, I have several of them. In fact, I have 4 of them. Bus A, B, C, and D. And at the bottom, you can see on the scribble strip that one of them I've called drum mix, one of them I've called guitar mix, a vocal mix, and an organ mix. So what's going on there? Well, we have, remember, we have 2 audio channels that contain guitars. And in fact, if we were to look at the list over here, we can see that we have 7 channels that contain drums. So what I've done is, in the same way we wanted to control the echo of those 2 tracks simultaneously with the assignable effects bus, I can control the overall output of the mix of certain tracks with a bus. You might hear these referred to as auxiliary buses. So let's take our drum mix as an example. I've got 7 tracks of drums, and so I've got 7 channels of drums that I might spend a lot of time making a great drum mix. But when I start adding other instruments into my project, that drum mix, although the individual mix of drums itself is great, it might be too loud, or it might be too soft, or I might want to hear my project without any drums in it at all. And in that case, what I've done here is I've taken my drum tracks, all 7 of them, and I've routed them to my drum bus. Same with these 2 guitars that we've been working with. I've got 2 guitars. I want to be able to control the overall mix of those guitars in and out of with all the other instruments. I can control individually the mix between the 2 guitars using the channel sliders, but if we go and look at my output, you can see that these tracks are not going to the master, they're going to my guitar mix. And if you look down at the bottom of my bus here, here's a bus called Guitar Mix, and that's where my guitars are going. So if I solo those 2 guitars again and play my project, you can see that the guitar mix bus is, the meters are jumping up and down. And I'm going to hide the other buses in here, so we're looking at just the guitar mix bus. Okay, so there we have the guitar mix bus. And again, if I unsolo those tracks, and we want to hear more guitar in the overall mix, instead of adjusting individually the mix of these 2 channels, I can just pull up the mix of the bus. Okay, so now the guitars are much louder, or I can pull them out. If I want to hear my mix without the guitars at all, I can solo the bus, or I can mute the bus. If I want to hear just the guitars, I can solo the bus, so forth. I've got the same insert effects that I can use. I could send these off to the echo. I could send this whole bus off to the echo assignable effect if I wanted. All of these tools are still here, but it just sending a mix like this, what we call a submix, to this bus enables me now to use just that bus to mix my submix into the overall mix. And it's a very powerful thing to be able to do. Now, another thing that you might want to use an auxiliary bus for, and I didn't do this in this project, but I can still sort of explain it to you. And let me hide the guitar mix bus. I'm going to create a new bus, insert a bus, and that's bus E. Let me show bus E, and here it is. I'm going to call bus E, in my scribble strip here, I'm going to call it my headphone mix. Another thing that you can do with busing is you can provide an alternate mix for somebody to listen to than the master mix that we've been listening to through the speakers. So if you imagine that you're in a studio situation and you've got somebody playing guitar along with the tracks, you're listening to the main mix, and as the engineer, you're sort of creating a mix on the fly, but they're in the other room telling you, hey, I want to hear more bass in my mix, and so forth. Well, if you turn up the bass on the master mix, you ruin whatever mix you've been working on. But if you instead send everything to the headphone mix, and to do that, I'm going to click the sends button here and choose headphone mix. I now have controls of these channels, and I can send a different mix to my headphone bus, which is bus E here, than what I'm sending out to my guitar mix. All right? And what this enables me to do then, if we come over to the bus B, right now it's set to master, but I could change this to a number of other things. Now, as I said, I don't have a multiple input-output audio device, so I don't have another choice but to come out the outputs that the master's already using. But if I did have multiple outputs, those hardware outputs would appear here in this list, and I could route the audio straight from this bus to a different pair of outputs on my audio device, and that I could route straight to a pair of headphones or a headphone distribution amp that my talent is listening to. So creating an alternate mix or creating a submix are great reasons to use busing in your project. I want to go back to the submix idea for just a second, and I want to switch over to Vegas Pro to do this. It's as I've explained it, pretty logical to see why you would use submixing like I used when I created a guitar mix and a bass in a drum mix in my music project, in a multi-track music project. But those of you who are using Vegas might be saying, well, okay, that's all fine and good for a multi-track project. But in Vegas Pro, I'm editing video, and I don't have multiple musicians playing different instruments. I just have, you know, my audio. Why would I want to use a submix? Well, I'm going to give you an example of exactly why you might want to use a submix in a video editing project. Here I've got a little clip of video that I just sort of threw together. I'm going to dock this out of the way here for a second. I just threw this together as a man sitting at a local airport talking about why he loves flying. And I've just added a bunch of kind of nonsensical audio tracks to it. And so basically what I have is 11 tracks of audio. One of those tracks is the natural sound of the man talking, and the rest of it is sound effects. So let's go ahead and play it.
Currently, my license rating is that of a private pilot instrument, so I do have my instrument rating. I receive that also through the Maury Airport in Middleton. All
right, so obviously I've added a bunch of cheesy effects in here just so you can kind of get the idea of having some sound effects in on your video project.
And then back to the Middleton Airport.
But the problem that you hear if I stop talking and you listen right now, sometimes the sound effects overpower what the man's saying. It overpowers what you really want people to be hearing. This is a perfect opportunity for you to use a submix because I like the mix of each individual sound effect in this project. I just don't like the fact that it's too loud. Well, instead of coming to each one of these individually and turning it down and trying to, you know, remix it so that it sounds good, I want to preserve the mix I have. I just want to turn the whole thing down. So, mixing console to the rescue. And in the same way that we made guitar, that I made a guitar submix and drum submix, I could have in Vegas Pro, I can make in this project a sound effects submix. And I've already added the bus A, and I've called it Sound Effects Mix. I'm going to go through my project, and starting with channel 3, which is the first sound effects channel, and hold my shift key and select channel 11. So I've selected all of these, and now instead of going to the master, I can choose bus A. And in fact, I had left it at bus A, so let me send it back to the master. So right now, this is the way it would be by default, but I can come in, click it, and send it all to bus A. And now when I play this thing, as I'm listening, I can hear my sound effects are too loud. Right? So I'm going to turn down the entire mix of sound effects
through what they call their West Coast
with the bus control.
It's a training trip that you fly from Middleton,
so even if you're not
Wisconsin,
working in a multi-track
Oregon,
audio project,
down the coast to Los Angeles,
as far as
and then
like a
back to
music
Middleton
project, you
Airport,
still typically
over a
have
week's period
multiple
of
tracks
time,
of audio
and
in your
all
video editing
instrument
project.
training, you're
And this
flying in the
busing,
clouds, you get
the same busing technique that we used in Acid Pro, really comes in handy here in Vegas Pro. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about before we get to the questions and answers is input busing. So let's go back over to Acid Pro, and I'm going to show, I'm going to add to my project an insert bus. Not an insert bus, an input bus. I'm going to insert an input bus. Now the concept of an input bus is a little difficult to explain when I can't show it, but because I don't have a multiple input-output device, I can't show it. So I'm just going to walk you through what it means. Because we have the ability to, if we have a multiple input-output device, remember I said I could take the send, and instead of sending it to the guitar mix, I could send it to one of the hardware outputs of my audio device. So imagine that I did that. I took this guitar, I sent it out a hardware out of my audio device, and from that hardware out, I plug into an external effects hardware effects unit, like an Echoplex or something like that. So maybe in your studio, you have a bunch of vintage analog gear that you want to run your tracks through. You can do that by coming out the sends of a channel to that hardware out, and then you use the input of the input bus to point to the output of your hardware unit to bring the audio back in. So you're basically just creating a loop. The beginning of the loop is the out of the channel you're sending to the middle of the loop, which is your hardware echo unit or whatever it is, and the end of the loop is the input bus, the in of the input bus, which you're receiving from that hardware unit. So as I said, without being able to actually show you that setup, it's a little hard to understand, but hopefully you get that it's just take the audio out of the channel, run it through a hardware outboard hardware piece of gear, and then run it back in through the input channel, and then fold it into your mix by sending it to the master or to the guitar mix or wherever you want to send it from there. All right, so that is pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Let me switch back over to PowerPoint just to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything here. Yeah, right. So that is the mixing console in a 50-minute nutshell, and I hope that you got a lot out of that. There are a lot of training resources available on our website that I just wanted to mention that we haven't been mentioning in the last couple of webinars, and we get a lot of questions about it. So if you go to the SonyCreativeSoftware.com website and then go to /training, there's a whole page there full of all kinds of resources. All the webinars that we've ever done are archived up there, so you can watch every one of them. A bunch of free training videos, newsletter tutorial article archives are up there. You can buy the seminar series training DVDs up there, and our digital video and audio production book is for sale up there. And you can also look into our certification program up there for you Vegas Pro users. If you want to get certified as a Vegas Pro user, you can check out the certification program. And that page again is SonyCreativeSoftware.com/training. We do have another promotion going on right now, as we normally do in conjunction with the webinars. And to get to the promo, go to SonyCreativeSoftware.com/webinar promo. And the promo this month, and it does end at the end of this month, so the 31st is your last day to get in on this. We've been running it for several weeks now. You can save 30% off of upgrades or 20% off a new purchase of any of our Pro products. So Acid Pro that we've been looking at here and Vegas Pro that we took a look at. And plus, you get two free training items like the DVD, the Seminar Series DVD, or the digital video and audio production book that I mentioned. So that's a pretty nice little promo there. You can also save 30% on any of the loops, samples, and sound effects that we have available, and that includes all of our premium loops, all of our classic loops, all of our sound effects from both Sony Pictures and the Detroit Chop Shop. Those are all part of this 30% off. So if you're looking for some loops to use with Acid Pro, or you're looking for some sound effects for your videos and so forth, now might be a good time to take advantage of that. And also on that promo page, there's a link to a contest that we're sweepstakes that we're running here, that you can win one of 7 nice Sony cameras. And basically all you need to do is to enter a comment on one of our product pages. So take a look at that and see if you can win yourself a camera. And again, these promos end a couple days from now on the 31st. So that location again is SonyCreativeSoftware.com/webinar promo. Okay. All right, then that brings us to the question and answer portion of the program. Now, as seems to be my habit lately, I kind of went over budget with time, so it's 5 minutes till the hour right now. We could probably do this for another 10 or 15 minutes if you guys don't mind going a little extra. I don't mind, so we'll just take a few questions. Whitney, I'm assuming we have some questions up there?
Yep, we do have a few questions today. The first question is, if I work with Vegas 11 in a surround project, are there possibilities to affect the volume envelopes of the audio tracks together to not have to adjust each track the same way?
That's an excellent question, and it's actually something I accidentally skipped over. So let me go back to the computer here and go to to Acid Pro. It works the same way in Vegas Pro. Another real advantage to setting up a submix like we did, I'm going to hide the input bus, and I'm going to show, let's show the guitar mix bus. Actually, let's show the drum mix bus instead. Okay, so here's the drum mix bus. One thing that I didn't mention that is really worth knowing and speaks to this question specifically: can I control the automation of my tracks, of a bunch of tracks as a group? And that's exactly why you might want to use a drum mix or a submix channel like I have here. So in this case, I've got all my drum channels, and I'll turn them all on so you can see them. And I'll turn the guitar channels off. So here are all my drum channels. I'll hide this, make myself a little space so you can see the bus. Because I have this bus in my project, I can automate the bus, just like we automated tracks earlier. Remember the touch automation settings? And before I do that, I'm going to go to my View menu, and I'm going to show my bus tracks. And when you do that, you get another little section down here at the bottom of the timeline. Let me make the timeline bigger, and then make this area a little bit bigger. You can see that I now have another little area down here for all my bus tracks. And if I go far enough here, you can see that I've got, I'm going to make these a little more visible here. My bus A is my drum mix track, so let me make that a little taller. Okay, that's my input, sorry. What I want is this one. That's my drum mix. All right? So I can automate this drum mix just like I automated my individual track above. So back in the console window, I'm going to turn my automation on for bus A, my drum mix. I've now got my automation tools. I'll start the project playing, and then as it's playing, I'll raise and lower the volume of the drums. I'm sorry, during the discussion I left that guitar really loud, so sorry about that, but I just did a quick automation, and you can see what I've got here. Let me go show those guitar tracks again and turn that guitar down a little bit so that it doesn't hurt quite so much. Let's see here. Over here. And actually it must be in the mix that I'm doing it. So we'll turn the guitars off. But you can see how I can just jump back and forth between the various mixes that I have. So here's my guitar mix, and I'm showing that, and let's just mute the guitar mix so that we just take that out completely. Okay. So now here's the automation that I created in my drum track. Sorry, I'm going to mute those two tracks. So now we can listen to the. All right, clearly I'm getting myself confused here. We still have some echo coming through or something. But the point is that yeah, I can automate my my bus, my audio bus, my submix bus, just like I automated a single track. So let's see if this works. Okay, now we've just soloed the drums, and you can see the audio going up and down, and I can grab hold of it again and turn it up and down again. So I can control the entire mix and automate the entire mix using the bus tracks. So.
Okay, great. The next question is there a way to control playback if you have the mixer up full screen and can't see the transport controls?
Yes, there is, and that's a great question too, and that's what you may have seen me doing a couple of times. There's most of you probably know the shortcut for play and stop is the space key. And that shortcut works if the mixing console has control. The space key starts and stops playback. So the easiest thing, if I had this full screen and I wanted to start it, I could just hit the space bar.
Terrific. In the Vegas Pro mixing console, can you explain the difference between the meters and the VU meters?
Oh, that's kind of a technical question, and I'm not sure I can do an adequate job of explaining it. The meters, the regular, what we normally see as meters is showing us the peak of our audio. So In other words, the highest audio level that that channel reaches. With VU meters in Vegas Pro, we're seeing, hopefully I'm getting this right. Michael, you might have to step in if I don't get this right. But with VU meters, you're seeing sort of an overall average volume of your tracks as opposed to the highest peak. How am I doing, Michael? He's got his headphones on and he's delayed a little bit so he can't hear me. But so your peak levels, your peak meters show the highest level that your track is peaking out at, and your VU meters are showing more of an average volume. Perceived volume, average perceived volume.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there a way to use buses for 5.1 mixing?
Is there a way to use buses for 5.1 mixing? Guess I'm not really sure I totally understand that question. If I was in a 5.1 project, let's go ahead and change this ACID project to a 5.1 project. I guess they're just asking, can I route things like I did in my regular stereo project to a 5.1 bus? And the answer is yes. And hopefully that's the question there.
That is the question,
Okay.
yes.
So yeah, you can route in the same way we routed to a stereo bus a moment ago. We can route our surround sound mix to a surround sound bus, and you can see that we've got in the bus itself, you've got surround sound control of that bus.
Okay. Can you show us how to pan audio from the left to the right or vice versa using the mixing console?
Yeah, that would be speaking to automation again. Let's go back to our properties and set this back to a stereo project. And I think I kind of did this during the course of the presentation, but let's make this a little smaller so you can see the track, the timeline. I'll just adjust my bus, my window here. So right now we have a sound effects mix, which is this bus A, and as I did a moment ago in the ACID Pro project with the drum submix, I can just automate this mix here in the bus. And to do that, I'm just going to turn on the automation setting, which is currently set to touch. Press the space key to play my project.
Currently, my license
And
rating
then
is
just
that of a
adjust the
private
panning.
pilot instrument, so I do have my instrument
Okay,
rating.
now if I come over to the view menu and show my video bus track, or not video bus tracks, but my audio bus tracks, you can see, if I make this a little bigger, that here I've created the automation in that track for the panning. So let's go back and create a little bit
Currently,
more
my
automation.
license rating is that of a private
So,
pilot instrument.
here I
so
panned
do have
left,
my
then
instrument
right,
rating.
then
I
back
received
center.
that
Now let's
also
pan it
through
all the way to
Maury
the
Airport
left.
in Middleton,
And you can see the envelope
through what
changing
they
as I
call their
pan it.
West
Now let's
Coast trip.
sweep
It's
it
a training
across
trip that you
pan
fly
it
from
all the way to the right.
Middleton, Wisconsin, out to Portland,
Okay?
Oregon.
So the key to your question is, yeah, you can just turn the automation on, and then to see the results of what you're doing, come over to the view menu and show your audio bus tracks so that you can see the envelope that's being drawn in your project.
Great. If you route external audio hardware into your mix via input buses, how can that be a part of the final mixed file?
When we added the input busing that I was talking about back in ACID Pro, and I'm starting to have trouble remembering where I talked about what, but we inserted an input bus, right, and we talked about sending this out to an Echoplex. If you've done that, the question is, okay, that external unit is not part of my software, so when I render this project, how's it going to pick up the mix that I sent, or how's it going to pick up the signal that I sent to the Echoplex and then back into my project? So when we added the input bus capability to both Vegas Pro and ACID Pro, we added a new rendering option. So if I go to File, Render As is the normal option that you use that just creates a file of everything in your project. but we added a new render option called real-time render. And basically what this does is it plays your project so that as it plays, it sends it out the bus to the external hardware unit and back in through the input bus and then onto your master, and then records or creates the file from that real-time playback. So that'd be probably the main use for real-time render, is that you can now take advantage of that external hardware loop that you created with the input busing. It also gives you another chance to check your final audio mix as it's rendering to make sure everything's okay. But in direct answer to your question, you would just real-time render your project with that hardware unit still hooked up in the same way, and then it'll pick up and end up in your final project.
Okay. One more?
Yeah, let's do one more.
A few people asked this one. They asked, is there a way to undo the automation if they don't like what they did?
Yeah, if once the automation is on the timeline, let's just get the mixing console window out of the way here. I'll dock it back down. Once it's on the timeline, you can do whatever you want with it. So all the same tools that you normally use for changing automation, you can change. You can just click and drag points. You can hold your shift key and draw the new automation however you want. You can delete portions. You can, right click and turn it off, and remove it altogether. So you have total flexibility once that automation is on the timeline. All right? Good questions. Okay. So let me get my controls back up here, and I'm going to switch over to Vegas, or to PowerPoint just one more time, just make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah. So good. That does it. That's the mixing console in both Vegas Pro, Acid Pro, and also in Acid Music Studio. Now, you don't have to use the mixing console. A lot of you have probably been creating projects that are just fine. They're great projects, and you never touched the mixing console before, because most of those tools are accessible in different ways, particularly in Vegas Pro. Pretty much all of the tools in the mixing console are accessible in a different manner, a little less so in Acid Pro, where you have to use the mixing console to get to the buses and all those things that we talked about. But in Vegas Pro, you have other ways to get around them. And so you may not have ever used the mixing console before. Hopefully, in this presentation, I've been able to show you why you might want to start thinking about exactly how you could use the mixing console and the bus routing and all these things that we talked about to really take your audio mixes to a whole different level and to make your work more efficient. And particularly if you have a dual screen monitor setup where you can take that mixing console and put it across on the other monitor, have your timeline up here and your mixing console open here. It's a great way to work. And when you have a serious audio mix to work on, the mixing console is a serious audio tool that you can use to get it done. So that pretty much wraps it up. I want to thank you for being here. Hopefully we'll be doing another one of these next month, although next month is the month of the annual NAB show, which the whole crew here is going to, so it's a little iffy as to whether or not we'll be able to get another webinar together in time for next month. But I think we will, and I think we'll be back. So in the meantime, have fun using the mixing console. Remember to check the training page for all the archives. We'll have this one archived within a couple of weeks. All right? So thanks for being here. So long.